Hey there fellow, this is Miss History coming to you from a hyperactive volcano. This time we chose to focus on Catherine de Medici for our next Women of History tidbit. Catherine was the daughter of Lorenzo de Medici, Duke of Urbino, and Madeleine de La Tour, a Bourbon princess related to many of the French nobility. Although Catherine was an orphan within days of her birth, she was highly educated, trained, and disciplined by nuns in Florence and Rome. She was married in 1533 by her uncle, Pope Clement VII, to Henry, Duke of Orleans, who inherited the French crown from his father, Francis I, in April 1547. Artistic, energetic, as well as discreet and courageous, Catherine was greatly admired at the court of Francis I, from which she derived both her political attitudes and her passion for building. In spite of Henry's persistent attachment to his mistress Diane de Poitiers, Catherine's marriage wasn't unsuccessful. Within 10 anxious years, she bore him 10 children. 4 boys and 3 girls survived. To keep herself busy, she supervised all of their education. Thus occupied, Catherine lived privately, though she was appointed regent in 1552 during Henry's absence at the siege of Metz. Her ability and eloquence were acclaimed after the Spanish victory of Saint-Côtier in Picardy in 1557. This was quite possibly the origin of her perpetual fear of Spain, which remained the touchstone of her judgments. It is essential to understand this in order to figure out the coherence of her career. Catherine's first great political crisis came in July 1559 upon the accidental death of Henry II. It was a traumatic bereavement from which it is doubtful that she had ever recovered. Under her son Francis II, power was retained by the Guise brothers. Thus began her lifelong struggle with these extremists, who, supported by Spain and the papacy, sought to dominate the crown and extinguish its independence in the commingled interests of the European Catholicism and personal praisings. Her essentially moderate influence was first perceptible during the conspiracy of Amboise in March 1560. This was an instance of violent petitioning by the Huguenot gentry, primarily against the Guiser persecution in the name of the king. Her merciful edict of Amboise in March 1560 was followed in May by that of Romorantin, which distinguished heresy from sedition, thereby detaching faith from allegiance. Catherine's second great political crisis came with the premature death of Francis II on December 5, 1560. Catherine had successfully obtained the regency for Charles IX, with Anton de Bourbon, King of Navarre, and First Prince of the Blood, as Lieutenant General, to whom the Protestants vainly looked to for leadership. The 10 years from 1560 to 1570 were politically the most important of Catherine's life. They witnessed the first 3 civil wars and her desperate struggle against the Catholic extremists for the independence of the crown, the maintenance of peace, and the enforcement of limited toleration. In 1561, with the support of the distinguished Chancellor Michael de la Hospital, she tried to satisfy the leaders of both religious factions to effect reforms and economies by traditional methods and to settle the religious conflict. Religious reconciliation was the convener's purpose of the Colloquy of Poissy. Catherine appointed a mixed commission of moderates that devised 2 formulas of consummate ambiguity, by which they hoped to resolve the basic Eucharist controversy. Possibly Catherine's most concrete achievement was the Edict of January 1562, which followed the failure of reconciliation. Unlike the proposals of Poissy, the edict was law, which the Protestants accepted and the Catholics, well, they rejected. This rejection was one basic element in the outbreak of civil war in 1562, in which, as she predicted, Catherine fell politically into the clutches of the extremists because the Catholic crown might protect its Protestant subjects in law, but could not defend them in arms. Thus, the problem of religion was one of power, public order, and administration. Catherine ended the First Civil War in March 1563 by the Edict of Amboise, an attenuated version of the Edict of January. In August 1563, she declared the king of age in the Parliament of Rouen, and from April 1564 to January 1566 conducted him on a marathon itinerary around France. Its main purpose was to execute the edict, and through a meeting at Bayonne in June 1565, to seek a stronger relationship between the crown and Spain, and to negotiate for Charles's marriage to Elizabeth of Austria. During the period of 1564 to 68, Catherine was unable to withstand the Cardinal Lorraine, statesman of the Guises, who largely provoked the Second and Third Civil Wars. She quickly terminated the Second Civil War in March 1568 with the Peace of Longjumeau, a renewal of Amboise. She was unable to avert its revocation in August 1568, which declared the Third Civil War. She was not primarily responsible for the more far-reaching Treaty of Saint-Germain in August 1570, but she succeeded in disgracing the Guises. For the next 2 years, Catherine's policy was one of peace and general reconciliation. This she envisaged in terms of the marriage of her daughter, Marguerite, to the young Protestant leader, Henry of Navarre, later Henry IV of France, and an alliance with England through the marriage of her son Henry, Duke of Anjou, or, failing him, his younger brother Francois, Duke of Alençon, to Queen Elizabeth. The complexity of Catherine's position during these years cannot be explained briefly. To some extent, she was eclipsed by Louis of Nassau and a group of Flemish exiles and youthful Protestants who surrounded the king and urged him to make war upon Spain in the Netherlands, which Catherine inevitably resisted. The issue of war or peace in the Netherlands was closely linked with the massacre of St. Bartholomew's Day in Paris on August 23rd through the 24th, 1572. Upon this occasion, following an abortive attempt against the life of Admiral Gaspard de Coligny, he and a number of his principal lieutenants, together with several thousand Huguenots, were killed. Catherine has always been blamed for these tragic events. There are 2 principal reasons for this. First, after some hesitation and inconsistency, the king assumed the responsibility by a declaration of August 26th in the Parliament of Paris, and the crown has been taken to mean Catherine. The second reason for the traditional accusations of Catherine is the work of the pamphleteers and the polemical nature of the historiography of the event. It is impossible to establish the origin of the assault upon Coligny, but, as a member of court, the royal family and the council, Catherine was among those who appeared to have authorized not the massacre itself, but the death of the admiral and his principal followers. This and the subsequent royal declaration of August 26th are both explained by the danger of the situation after the unsuccessful assault on Coligny, in which the infuriated Huguenots allegedly threatened the court with extinction and the kingdom with war. After the massacre of St. Bartholomew's Day, Catherine was more concerned with the election of Anjou to the throne of Poland in May 1573 than the prosecution of the Fourth Civil War. Upon the death of Charles IX a year later, she assumed the regency with the support of Parliament until the return from Poland of Henry III in August. Catherine placed high hopes in her favorite, Henry, for the regeneration of France, while knowing his weakness of character and his previous objection to the Catholics. For these reasons, Catherine neither sought to dominate Henry nor to rule in his place, but rather allow him to exploit her, and strove with persistent pains to supply his deficiencies. Until the death of Alençon in 1584, much of her attention was devoted to restraining his dangerous ambitions, which again threatened to involve France in hostilities with Spain. After the Treaty of Joinville of December 1584 between the Guises and Spain, at Henry's bidding, Catherine, though gravely ill, returned to this dual threat. But after 3 months of continuous effort, in order to avert the public breach between the Crown and the Guises, she was compelled by the Treaty of Namur in July 1585 to commit the king to making war against the Huguenots. Having failed with the Guises, the Crown turned to Navarre, the Protestant leader who, as possible heir, had an interest in preservation of the throne. In July 1586, Catherine undertook the rigorous journey to see him at St. Brice near Cognac. But there was nothing to which Navarre could safely commit himself. Thus, despite the heroic efforts of Catherine's old age, France was sinking into chaos when she died on January 5, 1589, in Blois, France, 8 months before the murder of Henry III. Nevertheless, her ultimate achievement was to have saved the kingdom just long enough to ensure the succession of the Bourbon Henry IV, by whom the royal authority was restored. What a lady! I guess that wraps it up for today. Thank you for watching. I'm Miss History signing off from that hyperactive volcano.